Welcome to Forest Chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and in today's episode, we're talking about organisational psychology with Dr. Lynda Folan. Dr. Lynda Folan started with organisational psychology too many years ago and is still in it and flying around the world, making things happen. Welcome to Forest Chat, Lynda.
Thank you.
Lynda, what is an organisational psychologist?
I guess in simple terms, when I describe an organizational psychologist, I spend my whole time working with organizations to either improve their outcomes or to fix challenges they're experiencing. And that includes three layers. So I work with the individuals, I work with teams, and I work with a broader organization. So it's a holistic approach to ensuring that organizations achieve the best they can, but also the people within organizations can achieve what they want to out of being within an organization. So it's really a holistic approach to managing organizations and supporting organizations to achieve their outcomes and to ensure that people achieve their own outcomes within that.
What type of interventions do you do within organisations?
I do a range of interventions. I guess the biggest demand at the moment is leadership development. So I spend a lot of time working with leaders, either in groups, one on one, actually helping them and supporting them to be the best. Because really, when you talk about organizations, the biggest impact comes from our leaders. So when we look at culture, 50 to 70% of the variance in culture comes from our leaders. So we have to work with leaders first and foremost. I also, because of my personal research that looked into resilience, I also spend quite a lot of time working across organizations, just building resilience levels. So those are probably the two dominant areas I work in. I also do a lot of individual executive coaching across organizations, particularly with CEOs, because the CEO role is often the most lonely in an organization. So CEOs, senior execs, I'll often spend a fair chunk of time working in that space. I also work with whole organizations to realign cultures, realign structures, realign strategy and vision. So that whole piece around how do you make a system that is the organization work more effectively. So it's really at a range of levels. Today, funnily enough, I'm working with a very dysfunctional team. So I also do that. I'm not sure why I get invited to do that, but I often get invited to work with very dysfunctional teams to support them to shift to functionality. So those are some of the areas, but it's actually hugely diverse. It's probably one of the most diverse areas in psychology. I could be working with a group one day, an organization another day, an individual the next moment. I was just in the US talking at the United Nations at the Social and Economic Forum about resilience globally. So I get invited to speak at a lot of conferences globally because of my work around resilience and leadership. So it's super diverse. I can be standing in front of a group of 1,000 people or online with a group of millions of people, as the United Nations was. So it's super varied.
I can imagine, because in an organisation, you've got every angle. You've got, as you mentioned, about the CEO and their effectively lonely perspective, down through the executive and teams. The teams are obviously working together, so you'd think that that's not such a lonely position. And then, those teams might be at the lower levels within the organisation. So from that
Mm.
perspective, you're looking effectively back up the organisation, and you've got a view of the leadership and how the leadership are performing from that perspective.
Yeah, and we use a lot of survey data. So we're often getting survey data from the whole organization to help the organization define how they want to move forward. So we're working at so many different levels to get the best outcome for the organization and the people within it. That's really the essence. So anything that involves people, reality is that organizations don't function without people. So if your people aren't functioning, your organization's not functioning. So it touches every aspect of the organizational outcomes. As you know, we're in a massive transformation in the workplace at the moment with AI, with the rise of a changing gender, a changing demographic. There's so much going on, the geopolitical destabilization. Organizations are shifting very quickly. And a lot of times the people are not keeping up with that. So my job is really to help organizations and people to keep ahead of the curve of change that's hitting us.
Yeah, you've raised two very big issues. You spoke earlier about resilience and change is massive. Like, it starts with tiny, tiny little things within an organization, right through to organizations that are evolving daily. How do you approach change, or how do you describe change? Where does it start and end?
I think in today's world, it doesn't end. So, we used to years ago talk about unfreezing and refreezing. That never happens anymore. Those old theories are really out of date. We talk more about building resilient organizations and resilient people and resilient teams. Because if you can build the capacity to rise to the change rather than be afraid of it, you really are building sustainable organizations. So we spend a lot of time working at all levels through the organization to build that resilience capacity so that they can just adjust as change hits them. So my book on resilience in leadership really focuses on how you build resilient leaders. But the foundation of that research is very much around any individual. Any individual uses those frameworks, they will build their resilience to cope with the destabilization that we're experiencing, not just in work, but in our personal lives. So our personal lives are just as destabilized as our work lives. So yeah, huge amount of work still to be done because, the human capacity is adjusting. It's not that we haven't had change in the past. It's just the pace is so much quicker. The pace has speed up where, 20 years ago, we would have said you had 5 years to bring about change. Now we're saying you have 6 months.
That's a massive change, isn't it?
Yeah, it's massive. The concertina ring change timeline is what really pushing organizations. And so that's why, I could literally work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and not keep up with the volume of work in this space at the moment because it's so busy. There's huge amount of change coming. And our leaders, some of them are coping incredibly, and you can see them, and some of them are coping really badly. So you've got both ends of the scale. So we're really trying to help leaders to lead out with their own resilience because we know their effectiveness as a leader is directly impacted by their resilience levels. So we're constantly working with that at the moment.
Can you describe for us what resilience looks like, or what contributes to it?
When I did my research, we came up with 3 key areas that facilitate healthy levels of resilience. So the first one is described as internal locus of control, but in simple terms, what that means is you've got to learn how to own your own actions and stop blaming others for where you're at. We've got to stop being the victim of our circumstances and take responsibility for our choices and our reactions. So that's the foundation of resilience. The second one is what we've described in the research as self-concept well-being. Again, in simple terms, that means you've got to have good emotional intelligence. You've got to be able to regulate. You've got to be able to understand your emotions. You've got to be able to actually work with your emotions to get good outcomes, because your outcomes are driven by your emotional reactions. And so that's the second one. The third one is what we describe, again, in technical terms as constructive thinking. In simple terms, what we're meaning is you've got to get control of your thought process. What we've taught people in the past is that your mind controls you. That's rubbish. You have to control your mind. Mind will trigger unnecessary emotional reactions to things that don't matter. We see it on social media, people reacting to someone being grumpy with them on social media. That's a mind game that we need to get control over. And there's a huge amount of strategies in all three of those areas articulated. And the more research that comes out, my research was one of the first 5 papers to be written, but that was just as COVID was hitting. Post that, we've got a lot more research. So we're getting way more information that helps us to understand how to really flourish in this destabilized world. So it's really exciting things. We've got more tools than we've ever had to help us to be resilient. We also have strategies that help organizations to be resilient.
That's amazing. So the things that you mentioned there about being in control of your own decisions, being responsible for yourself and being emotionally aware and controlling your own thoughts, where are people taught that, like in life?
Well, the challenge is they're often not taught those skills, because what's happened over time is that our education system, and this is part of why I was invited to the United Nations to talk about the fact that, our education system is not designed to help people develop good resilience levels. It's designed to give them intellectual knowledge. Intellectual knowledge is going to be taken over by AI. So we've got to actually reinvent our education system so that it helps our younger people to actually come out with resilience, emotional intelligence, self-regulation, all of those aspects. And we're not there yet. So it's a big job, because we've got to change our education system. So a lot of times people come into the organization without those skills. So that's why we're spending so much time in organizations building that capacity. Also, the older generation didn't talk about things like emotional intelligence until the 1980s. So a lot of the older generation have no clue around how to emotionally regulate unless they've chosen to learn that themselves. So we've had limited education, both ends of the scale, both our younger generation and our older generation. And so we're really retrofitting these skills. But if we can teach them much younger, and some schools are brilliant and are starting to do emotional intelligence training. But my view is we need to stop teaching spelling and start teaching emotional intelligence. In simple terms, we need to get better at that stuff.
There are some essential things you need for communication, but beyond that, it's much more important that people are actually able to interact and understand and work with each other, in effect. And a big part of that is having that resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. Without that, our ability to actually enjoy life is reduced. Not just our ability to function in life, but actually enjoyment. If you look at our satisfaction scores globally are on a decline, which is not good. We should, we're in a society where we have more than we had in the past. We should be enjoying life more, and yet we're not. Two most important things for life satisfaction, if you look at the longest running piece of research, this life satisfaction comes from connection. So if you're not capable of building good connection and you don't have good emotional intelligence, your satisfaction is going to drop. And the second one is having purpose and having something that's outside of yourself that you're aiming for. And in society, we've lost that purpose. A lot of our older society, if you look back years, religion provided purpose to a certain extent. We've come away from that. And so people are finding it really hard to find purpose in life. So those are the two most important things from the longest running piece of research on life satisfaction. And we're not providing those. We're not teaching our young people how to find that. We're not teaching our older generations how to find that either.
It almost seems negligent on the part of the education system if that information is there about what is important, but the education system is directed elsewhere. To me, there's a problem.
Oh, definitely. And a lot of people are trying really hard to change the dial on that. But when you've got a system that's been ingrained, our universities are very ingrained in producing great graduates. But are those graduates going to be functional in today's society? Probably not. Because all their intellectual knowledge is now on ChatGPT or on one of those platforms. So it's just a very different world. And it's hard for them to keep up because those traditional systems are very ingrained.
And in a way, they've given away their knowledge to AI. And I say that they didn't do that knowingly or thinkingly, but effectively AI has stolen that information by the way that they train their models.
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, and that's why I get invited to speak at lots of because we're trying to anticipate what work will look like. None of us really know. So we're trying to evolve organizations, but we don't actually know what the future looks like fully. We know some aspects. We know that knowledge isn't going to be as big a bargaining tool as it was in the past.
Yes, and that changes the entire power dynamic within the employer-employee relationship.
And in the education.
Yeah, absolutely. I have been watching some videos on AI and they seem to be in the large language models. Let's teach it all the information and then let's teach it to do the research. So they're building this up in the background at the moment. So the AI will do its own research, test its own theories, all that sort of thing. And then effectively it'll get to the point where when it rolls out, it'll effectively knock out every job in society because they'll be able to do everything. And that's a real challenge. I've got a YouTube playlist on my personal account looking at all the things I've been looking at there. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, and the interesting part is that if we really understand the parts that AI are going to take away, we need to actually focus on the human endeavor parts that AI is still clunky around, yeah, and probably will never become anything more than clunky. So we already know that AI, if it's not controlled, doesn't work in human endeavor stuff. So, for example, the coaching world tried to use online coaching systems, and it actually caused someone to commit suicide. Yeah. So they've
Yeah,
pulled back massively because while AI is able to go with people's thought process, it doesn't have the emotional capability. So that's why I'm saying, if you're learning emotional intelligence, if you're learning emotional regulation, if you're learning how to work with people, that's where the future of human endeavor will be, not in knowledge-based information.
we're taking it away from all the easy knowledge stuff and turning it into interacting with people, which is the trickier bit.
We used to call it soft skill.
Lynda, what does it take you to be an organisational psychologist?
There's two areas that are super important in my work. The first area is that I have the capacity and the mental tension of all the psychological principles that I bring to bear. So I've spent my whole life studying psychology of organizations, of individuals. And every time I'm working with a group, an individual, an organization, I'm bringing all that knowledge, synthesizing it, and very quickly making decisions around what actions I'm going to use to resolve the issues. So that's the first bit. You've got to do, I spend a lot of time listening to podcasts, reading, writing, researching. So, and it's not a one-off thing. A degree is not going to help you to stay ahead. I've listened to 5 podcasts on my way to the client this morning. So I'm constantly engaging in intellectual, mental development. The other aspect is my own emotional management, my own resilience levels. I spend an inordinately large amount of time controlling my energy through my resilience levels and my emotional management. So, because I'm always working with people, I cannot allow emotions or lack of resilience to impact, because I could negatively impact on someone. So I'm very conscious. I have very disciplined routine around managing my resilient energy and my emotional reactions to things, because I'm often hearing and seeing things that the average person, it would tip them over the edge if they heard as much stuff as I hear.
It's almost like they're confessing by the sound of things.
Mm. Oh, absolutely. I hear stuff that if I wasn't regularly cleaning up my emotional reactions would tip me over the edge. So as a psych, you have to have professional supervision, but that's not enough on its own. I have to be regular daily practices around keeping my emotions clean, keeping myself healthy, keeping myself able to control myself. Yeah, so huge amount of work there.
So that's all in the emotional space. What does that look like in the things that you do to help you with that?
So I have a fairly disciplined approach to it. So in the morning, I will do at least a 20-minute meditation. That'll be longer if I've got very emotional stuff to deal with during the day. In the evening, I'll do my exercise to get rid of any residual emotional reactions from the day that have affected me physiologically. I'll also do, if I feel like there's residual emotional stuff, I'll do some journaling. I'll also then, before I go to bed, do meditation to control my mental processing. So that's my daily routines. I also then have monthly routines around my focus, my purpose, thinking about what matters in life, making sure I've got balance. I put all my holidays in so that I have regular breaks. So there's a huge amount I do both on a daily basis and an annual basis and a monthly basis.
So they all sound like they're things that people hear. If you get into that space of thinking about wellness and so on,
Mm,
a lot of those things that you do are mentioned there, and you've clearly put that together in a program that works for you.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think everyone's got to find their own strategies that work for them. I'm not a great believer in cookie cutter approaches, but you need to look after your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, and your sense of purpose and your sense of what matters in life. So you need to look after yourself on all 4 of those levels. And to be honest, Paul, we've known, for a long time, 4 of those are important. Stephen Covey, who was the author of The 7 Habits, talked about that in the 1960s. So, we've known about it for a long time. It's just become so important in today's world.
Yes, so important, but we still don't teach that to our kids when they come through school, do we?
No, not unless it's taught in the home.
Oh, yes, in the home. And that can be quite variable. In some cases, people will be getting the opposite of what they need to learn at home.
Absolutely. Well, remember, domestic violence is through the roof globally. So a lot of kids are actually experiencing trauma in the home. You know, we still have massive issues with bullying in schools. So kids are often experiencing the opposite, and they don't then know how to regulate, how to work with emotions, how to deal with trauma. And so, we've got repetitive trauma being enacted on generation after generation.
It's sad when there's knowledge about it, and that knowledge somehow needs to get to people far earlier and far
Absolutely.
more consistently.
Yeah. We reckon you should be teaching it from about age 4. Once a child has cognizance of their emotional reactions, because they know they're emotional, but it's articulating. So we should really be teaching it super early and repetitively.
I agree. Like the information that's available about it, to me, I'm seeing how negligent our education system is in that space.
Yeah. And, we can abdicate responsibility to the education system, but I also think it sits on our shoulders as parents. As parents, we should be spending time with our kids talking about emotions, opening up the conversations, articulating how to self regulate. But if you don't know that yourself, then you are relying on the
Mm.
education system. Complex
Yeah.
area.
Yes, and I guess in some way, you mentioned also being taught at home, and you mentioned in the past religion was a big part. And so, because religion is less evidence in the home, then that's one area that has actually dropped out that has led to what we're seeing now because people have not got that direction anymore. So that
Yeah.
combination between, I'll call it education, but I include religious education in that.
Mm. Or at least, we need to teach people how to find a sense of purpose, whatever that looks like. And religion in the past did provide some of that. The reality is that as religion has declined, we haven't found another way of helping our young people to find purpose.
I'll come back to an issue that I had when I worked for the state government here in WA. And I have mentioned this previously on the podcast, but what happened was that we were writing material for a course. Now, the courses physical activity type courses, and the organisation was treating the information that anything that got passed about 6 months ago since you done something with it, that they considered it out of date, when in fact only minuscule control elements around what was there might have become out of date. The fundamentals were all still solid, and they'd been there, in this case, since World War II when they were developed.
Mm.
So, at that point, you're talking that was, 60, 70 years ago.
Mm.
And the whole concept of what was good in the past is no longer relevant or acceptable. But there are still elements of what was done in the past that we don't understand why they did it. And now we've dropped it and we're understanding, or we're starting to learn, I hope, that some of those things actually need to be in place.
Mm. That's the challenge with any form of change. You need to keep the good stuff and move forward with the stuff that's ineffective. But often we throw the baby out with the bathwater. um, and so we end up losing sight of some of the fundamentals that still apply. And this is very true. You know, uh, Research in psychology has moved forward massively in the last 10 years, but there's still some fundamentals that haven't changed. So that 70-year research that's been going on around life satisfaction has found the same results year in, year out for 70 years. That connection and purpose are the most important things for life satisfaction. We've known that for 70 years, and yet we've lost sight of the fact that actually, if we lose connection and people are working from home all the time, that's going to cause a dysfunction in society. And if we don't help our young people to find purpose, that's going to cause dysfunction in society. 42% of our Gen Zs have already been diagnosed with mental health. That's a phenomenal number. Yeah. Those numbers are
Absolutely.
out of control. So if we've got this kind of tsunami of mental health, there's got to be some stuff behind that we need to shift and change, because what we're doing right now is not working.
Lynda, what does it mean to you, your family, or the community that you're able to be an organisational psychologist?
I'll start with the community, because the work I do in organizations, which would be my community in terms of work, has a massive impact. I'll have those clients like, you've changed my life. You've affected my home as well as my work life. You've supported me through really tough times. So I know that we have a massive impact on the community, a positive impact on their life satisfaction, their outcome, what they achieve. We often don't see it because we walk in, do some work, then walk away. But I do know from the incidental comments I hear. In fact, I bumped into someone just recently who I'd worked with 10 years ago. And she said, Lynda, what you said to me on that day 10 years ago has changed my life. So we know that from incidental comments and feedback that we get, but I know that every day I make a difference in people's lives and in organizations' effectiveness. And often the organizations I work with are doing really hard work out in their communities. And so if I can support the organization to be more effective, then I know that they are delivering better outcomes in their communities. So, I think there's a roll-on effect, not only just for the individuals and the groups and the organizations, but it has a broader impact. And personally, I guess that gives me a huge amount of satisfaction, a sense of purpose, a sense of, hey, I can make a difference with this work, particularly in the resilience space, because I know that changes outcomes for people's lives. It changes outcomes for their families as well. So personally, it gives me a huge amount of, I guess a sense of purpose. And it makes the value that I add feel like like it's worthwhile. In terms of my family, I have a 21-year-old son who he now admits that he was a very challenging teenager. But what it means is that, from a personal perspective, I can see the impact of my work even in his life. As he enters into that full adulthood, I can see him learning some of the things I taught him as a young person, starting to actually get hold of him and help him to be better and help him to live the best life he can live. I've just turned 60 a couple of months ago, and at my 60th, he publicly said, Mom, you're the person I respect most in the world. And so for me, that's the impact in my personal life into my family.
That's incredible. You're able to see quite a lot. I mean, you do a lot of work, but you're able to see those threads that actually are tying it all together, and you can see that it's working. That's amazing.
Yeah. If we work over a long period with an organization, you can actually see the organization turn around, that's even more phenomenal, because if you've been a part of, I don't do it on my own, I do it with the organization, but if you can be a part of that transformation of an organization, that's phenomenal.
Absolutely. And good organisations, they just impact people in positive ways.
Absolutely.
So, Lynda, if somebody wanted to become an organisational psychologist, how would they go about it?
Obviously, you need the degrees behind you, and you need nowadays, certainly in Australia and most of the world, you need both a base degree in psychology and then a master's degree. You don't need a PhD to be an organizational psychologist, but you do need a base degree and a master's. But my guidance to anyone who wants to work in the space I work in is, first of all, get yourself a really good mentor to support you and to help you to develop your skills. The second is never, 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 never stop learning. Get your degrees, but never stop learning. So it's a constant, and it's learning both, as I said, in that resilience, emotional intelligence space and the intellectual frameworks and theories and all of that. So it's in both areas that you need to be constantly learning.
That'll keep you busy on its own, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And is there something next for you, Lynda?
Oh, my business manager keeps telling me I need to write another book. So I guess that will be something I do at some stage. But I guess next for me is I'm getting to the end of my career where I want to start helping other people to take on the work that I do. So I'm really growing people around me to grow into the space that I've been working in and looking to kind of transition healthily into retirement in about 5 to 10 years. So I'm already starting to think about what that looks like, because I think retirement's a big age for people to unhealthily transition their purpose. So I'll always keep working to some extent. So I'll do board work or whatever it is, conference speaking. I will continue in that vein. But obviously, as we get older, we want to do different things. So that's really maybe writing some more books. And my philosophy is never stop learning. So I'm very keen at some stage to do some further study in the neuroscience world. So I'm very interested in neuroscience and how psychology and neuroscience can come together. So who knows? But I'm constantly thinking about what's next and what's going to keep me energized and keep me excited about life. I also have a pilot's license, which I haven't been able to use as much as I like. So I will be re-engaging with that as I head towards a different stage in my working career.
Sounds very exciting just by itself.
So yes, who knows what the future holds, but there's lots of exciting opportunities.
Thank you very much, Lynda, for being on Forest.chat. And Forest.chat listeners wish you all the best with your future endeavours.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Forest.chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and in today's episode, we're talking with Dr. Lynda Folan about being an organisational psychologist. Remember, there are 4 ways to get involved with Forest.chat. Share the domain Forest.chat with your friends and family and people you meet. When you sign up for emails, you get advance notice of episodes. Listen to the episodes at forest.chat/episodes. If you do something interesting or that other people may find interesting, book an interview at forest.chat/interview. If you want to support a small business, book an advert at forest.chat/advert. I'm looking forward to joining you with our next guest. Until then, enjoy making it happen.